And now it's time for our early access review of Dumb Money.
When several investors from the Reddit forum Wall Street Bets, including Keith Gill, aka Roaring Kitty, decide to take a chance on what the financial world sees as a lost cause, they're rewarded for it. However, the hedge fund managers betting against them aren't going down without a fight, even if it means dragging in the government. Rebecca, talk to me about Dumb Money.
Not so dumb after all. I really was excited to see this, considering the uproar that occurred after the short squeeze with GameStop. There was a documentary we watched, I want to say last year. It was called GameStop Rise of the Players, and it really put the focus on several of the key players in this moment. One player who got a lot of spotlight was Keith Gill, aka Roaring Kitty.
Correct.
Deep bleeping value. I have to say that, otherwise YouTube will just go.
Yep.
But I was really interested in Keith's story, especially considering he seemed to really keep in mind a lot of the financial structure given his background. So it's kind of interesting to see him come from being an almost average Anthony
Yes.
to becoming this memeable figure.
Well, and people followed him. They believed in him that GameStop would be something. And he is. He's just a typical guy. He's in Massachusetts. His story, his sister had passed away recently. Middle-class family. I believe his dad was like a truck driver. Just really, married, young kid, having fun. It's just hilarious because he knows stocks. He has a degree in accounting, so there's some background for him. But he, puts on the cat shirt and he's got the little hang in there baby poster. I mean, everything is all cat. And he's over there talking stock tips.
Keith's like a lot of people in my generation. We received education. We went out in the world expected to be immediately rewarded because, that's what we grew up with. You get a college education, everything will be fine. You'll be taken care of.
Everything will be fine. That's the mantra, right?
They'll be taken care of. And Keith finds himself in this industry that's kind of having a massive turnaround.
Correct. And I think that's the story, the underdog story. And to be clear, this movie is not only about Keith Gill, although the documentary focused on him a great deal more. This movie, Dumb Money, has several different people that they follow, including his brother.
His brother is played by Pete Davidson. So
that was, yeah.
If you're looking for some chuckle-worthy lines, Pete delivers.
Well, and I appreciate his parents are in there, although briefly, but the brothers, the back and forth, right? I have two brothers, so I appreciate the little bit of the bickering, the competition, and one is successful by the world standards. The other one is less successful, relying a little bit more on mom and dad, and the conflict that they have, but how they come together after the passing of the sister. And as he's going through with this GameStop situation, and I'm trying not to spoil it too much. However, I would say I liked that about the movie, that he was rooting for him, even though he realized it focused, Pete Davidson's character, his brother, focused more on magnifying how he wasn't successful.
I think the movie was very successful when it focused on the relationships that the character Keith,
correct,
was interacting with.
Well, and his wife, the relationship with his wife was really positive, wanting to be a good dad. I could really feel the dilemma that he had around this.
I felt like sometimes the movie didn't know what it wanted to be. It felt kind of disjointed to me. And part of that is the character arcs you see all these other characters go on following Keith's advice.
Correct. So the characters are actual real people by name. They named them. They talked about how much they invested and then whether they made money or not at what point. So the characters are real people, and you felt that disjointed the movie. Is that correct?
I think that I really enjoyed seeing that, but I feel like they were almost an afterthought in some ways.
Okay.
And I felt like if you're going to give Keith this much attention,
yes,
I feel like the other characters I'd like to know more instead of just offhandedly in a dialogue, oh, my husband left me, oh, this happened. I wanted to see some more lived in moments, I guess you could say.
Well, it's
For these
interesting too
characters.
because you're saying here's what I'm hearing you say is the relationship was, I don't know, more important, is that accurate? But the relationships were either equally or more important than the actual money won or loss. Is that correct?
Yeah, I feel like the focus was on I'm getting money, oh, I'm losing money. And there was moments
But it's in the title, dumb money.
But there was moments where that almost happened. There's I can't remember America Ferrera who she's portraying. But there's one moment where she's at a gas station and she encounters somebody.
Oh, right.
And
know
I
the
thought
scene.
that was a really nice, simple, touching scene that gave me a glimpse into that character's psychology. And Keith got a ton of those scenes, which makes sense. He's the main focus of the movie.
Correct, yes.
But I feel like if they had done that with several of the other characters, I think it could have been a deeper movie.
That's interesting. And I agree with you. I like the story and the fact that they're true stories. Of course, they have a backstory. And I agree with you. I think Keith Gill, that was the focus, more so the documentary that we were referring to that came out last year. But I don't know. I kind of go back and forth because the movie wasn't overly long. I was engaged the entire movie, I will say. However, I do always like the backstories, and I'm a sucker for the true story. So I would agree with that. That could have been added, and I believe, would have been equally engaged.
I feel like I would have definitely been more engaged. I feel like especially there's a burden when you talk about real people in film and you fictionalize them.
Correct.
There's that added emotional allowance that you already have as an audience knowing that this is a real person. But I think a lot of directors need to spend that allowance more wisely. Just because it's a real person doesn't mean that your audience is going to stay glued. They're going to pay attention, but they're not going to stay glued per se.
And you didn't feel glued.
No, and I am really sad because I loved Craig's approach on I, Tonya. Craig has directed the remake of Fright Night, which I really enjoyed. It's a nice guilty pleasure movie.
See, I haven't seen that, so I'll take your word
But you
for that
have
one.
seen Lars and the Real Girl.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We like that movie.
You have seen the new Cruella.
I have seen the new
And
Cruella.
all of this in addition to I, Tonya.
Which is hilarious. His range is quite something.
He's fantastic. And I think
Agreed.
that he was missing something here.
Well, it's interesting. I'm laughing. Lars and the Real Girl. Not a true story, despite what some people think. But I, Tonya was a true story.
And
So he is able to capture real people well, I think.
And to be clear, I'm not a huge Tonya Harding fan.
Well, I don't know many people that are at this point.
More common than you think.
Wow. Okay. There's this whole underground movie. I don't not like her, but she's not my favorite. She's done some crazy things. She makes Oregon look bad, which, hey, come on now.
In addition to Craig directing this,
Yes.
I was really excited about the cast.
Oh, me too. I would agree with that.
The cast works well with the material they've got. The problem is the material they've got needs more meat.
Oof. Okay. Do you feel different screenplay, more longer,
more oomph to the moments? I think if there would have been some additional running time, I think we could have seen more depth to the people being brought, not just Keith.
Well, and it's interesting. Well, when we get to hear about the big guys, right, the biggie wigs up there, their story felt pretty glossed over, except for Robin Hood. It felt like that was a little bit more in depth.
And Robin Hood is a key player. It's almost a bridge between the smaller folks
Yes.
and the larger hedge fund dudes.
Well, it's kind of the baddies, right? The baddies are the hedge fund guys. And it really, the dots, I think, in my mind were very close. You know, good guys, bad guys. Little guys going up against the big guys. And to me, that was the primary theme. And as I'm listening to you, I tend to agree. I think it would have been more impactful to hear more stories because I think it was obvious what the problem was.
The stories they picked were really good. I think they represented a wide range of
That's
the people
a great
who
point. That's a
invested
great point.
in GameStop during this time.
I appreciate that. That's a great point.
I just want to know more about them besides I'm interested in the money.
Well, okay, but
And they tried, and there was they tried to add a little bit, but it's a problem when I'm watching a movie and there's almost like it feels like a different movie in some ways. I'm like, oh, this would be a great movie. Hold on to this moment, and then it just cuts to moment that is more streamlined.
All right.
That kind of destroys the emotional connection that I found in the previous scene.
But going back to your real quick point about the diversity, I appreciated that because they had two college girls, and I appreciated they were saying this is their college debt, and if they invest well, if GameStop actually does what they're hoping it will do, they'll eliminate their debt. This is how their life will change.
Yes.
And the nurse, right, they talk about how her life would change. She would pay off her house, she'd be able to buy a house, she'd be able to pay for her kids' braces. So I think they did a good job of saying it's not just the money on the screen, it's what the money will do for their life. And as you said, a wide range of people, middle class, lower middle class, just, people just trying to, find their way financially.
I think one of the big things for me was there's a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. And I think the showing would have been more impactful than the telling per se.
Well, especially if the telling isn't making it for you.
Yes.
I would agree with that. Do we have any questions from the box?
As you mentioned, we saw the documentary last year, GameStop Rise of the Players, in the theaters. Do you think people should see that versus this? Should they see one first and the other one second? Kind of put those together as far as how you think people should watch.
I would do the documentary first because there's several moments, kind of like info dump moments, that are briefly mentioned in the film and then kind of shuffled under the rug. I think they'll provide better context to these moments and explain how they impacted the players involved. There's one key moment that they didn't gloss over, and I'm very glad that they didn't. But for the most part, I think it will add more oomph to the story. I was definitely more invested with the movie since I'd seen the documentary.
Well, and there's actually a book that precedes both of the movies. And if you're a reader, which you're a voracious reader, I would say the book may actually provide additional context.
I believe you're referring to the Antisocial Network, correct?
Correct. Okay. But I agree with you. I think the documentary provided interest in this whole situation for me. Had I not seen the documentary, I don't know that I would have necessarily. I probably still would have saw the Dumb Money movie just because I enjoy stories like this. But I don't know if I would have been as excited about it. The trailers were pretty good and compelling. But like you said, knowing the story of Keith Gill, knowing the story of GameStop, that provided context for me.
Well, there's several characters that are in the film. It feels like the trailer tells you everything you already need to know about this.
That's true. And I'm trying hard not to spoil it. However, just Google GameStop, you'll have a wealth of information. I believe the trailer does put the dots pretty close.
I think Olivia Thirlby was so underused in this film.
Well, and here's the other part about not overshooting the movie and saying too much, because we did see it early release and it won't be released for about a few more weeks if all things go well. Rebecca, 5 monster flying in my hand. They're not going to stay here long.
Ooh.
1 to 5, 1 to 5. Where did they land?
This one's landing at a 2 for me.
Oh, okay. Number one reason why?
I was just disappointed in this movie. I wanted so much more from this movie, and I get that you have a main character that you're focusing on. But the minute you bring all these side characters in, that's taking emotional space from the main character. So make it worth my time when you bring somebody in.
Wow. Okay. What to say about that? I would say 2 and a wing for me. I think it's a fair average movie. In some aspects, I do believe it was above average. The acting was good. The story is compelling. However, a 3 just feels a bit much. Rebecca, do you think this movie is worth a watch? You're rating it a 2, which is slightly below average.
I think this is a movie for a very specific audience. This is the audience who's seen films like Wolf of Wall Street, actual Wall Street movie.
Yes, right.
And wanted something that feels a little bit more focused around the underdog. They definitely take a lot of the tropes that are played in these movies. Kind of the language is definitely noticeable.
Oh, okay.
I'm surprised you
The
got
fact I have this in my hand. This is our disclaimer for language. If I had 10 of these, I would say we would use all of them in the first 10 minutes. It's a lot of language and a lot of the little bombs going off.
But I think that's a movie for a very specific audience. I think that audience is going to enjoy this movie.
So I think that's a good point, though, right? Who is the audience? Who do you think? Do you think your grandpa would go see this movie, or
Oh, hell no.
yeah, right. Well, right. And I would say if you're sensitive to that, which understood, if you're sensitive to that, this is not the movie, I don't think, for you. Plus, there's a lot of hip hop, really explicit music in to set the tone. I understand they were trying to set the tone and be a little edgier.
It's a specific trope, especially in these movies nowadays, too.
I would agree with that, but I would say, is it worth a watch? I would say it is. However, if you like the story, meaning you want to follow the GameStop story, you like Keith Gill, you like all of those, the underdog story, I would say I think the documentary might be a little bit more universal. And from you, it sounds like that's a much better version of this story. Is that correct?
I think so. I think this is going to put you in the mindset of one specific person, but I think the documentary gives you a better overview of the situation.
Thank you for watching this Cocoon Cast clip. This clip was taken from our weekly show, which is released on Saturdays.
If you enjoyed this video, click the link or head over to our main channel for more movie reviews, Hollywood news with a slice of snark. Thank you for watching, and remember,
Movies are
better together.